In the morning, my husband texted me, "Don't come home. My mistress is moving in and she wants the master bedroom." I didn't cry. I listed our $5 million penthouse for just $100 and sold it to the first student who called. When they arrived with her luggage, the new owner, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." The morning light filtered through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors of our Fifth Avenue penthouse. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring my coffee with a silver spoon that had been a wedding gift 32 years ago, when my phone buzzed against the granite countertop. Griffin's name appeared on the screen. After 32 years of marriage, you develop a sixth sense about your husband's moods through his text messages. This one felt different before I even opened it. "Don't come home today. Jessa is moving in and she wants the master bedroom." I read it once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering against the floor in a symphony of broken porcelain and splattered liquid. The sound echoed through our 5,000-square-foot apartment like a gunshot. Griffin wasn't asking. He wasn't explaining. He was simply informing me that I was being replaced. I stood there, staring at the broken cup, and something inside me broke just as cleanly. Not my heart, that had been cracking for months as I watched my 61-year-old husband transform into a man I didn't recognize. It was something deeper. My illusions, perhaps. My faith in the life we'd built together. Jessa. 28 years old, with platinum blonde hair and a laugh that could cut glass. I'd met her exactly 3 times at Griffin's company events. Each time, she'd looked through me like I was invisible, like I was already gone. I suppose, in her mind, I was. I picked up my phone with trembling fingers and called Griffin's office. "Meredith." His voice was cold, businesslike. "I told you not to come home." "This is my home too, Griffin," I managed to say, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "Not anymore. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but Jessa needs space to settle in. You can stay at that little hotel you like downtown for a few days while we work out the details." "And the little hotel I like." He was talking about the boutique place near my gallery where I sometimes stayed when I worked late, as if this was just a minor inconvenience, like construction noise. "Work out what details?" I asked. "The divorce, obviously. My lawyer will call you." The line went dead. I stood in our kitchen, my kitchen, surrounded by 32 years of accumulated life. The copper pots I'd chosen for our first apartment. The Italian espresso machine Griffin had surprised me with for our 10th anniversary. The refrigerator covered in photos of vacations, celebrations, moments when we were happy. All of it suddenly felt like evidence of a life that had never really existed. My hands were shaking as I opened my laptop and did something that surprised even me. I went to a real estate website and listed our penthouse for sale. Purchase price, $5 million. My asking price, $100. The phone started ringing within minutes. "Ma'am, I think there might be an error in your listing," said the first caller. "No error," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The second caller hung up, assuming it was a prank. The third caller was different. "Mrs. Henderson, my name is Sophie Chen. I'm calling about the apartment listing. I know this might sound crazy, but is this real?" Sophie's voice was young but serious. There was something in her tone that made me pause. "It's real," I said. "I'm a graduate student at Columbia Law. I specialize in real estate law. I have to ask, are you under any duress? Is someone forcing you to sell?" I almost laughed at the question. Was I under duress? My husband of 32 years had just texted me that his 28-year-old mistress was moving into our bedroom. If that wasn't duress, what was? "No," I said quietly. "I'm making this decision completely on my own. I can be there in an hour with a cashier's check for $100, Sophie said. "But Mrs. Henderson, before you do this, are you absolutely certain?" I looked around the apartment one more time, at the wedding photos on the mantelpiece, at the art collection I'd carefully curated over decades, at the life I'd thought was permanent. "I've never been more certain of anything," I said. Sophie arrived exactly 57 minutes later. She was petite, with short black hair and intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple navy suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than my first car. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, extending her hand. "Sophie Chen." I invited her in, and I watched her take in the space with the eye of someone who understood real estate. She walked to the windows, examining the view of Central Park. She ran her fingers along the marble countertops in the kitchen. She studied the crown molding with an attention to detail that impressed me. "This is worth considerably more than $100, she said finally. "I know exactly what it's worth," I replied. "May I ask why you're doing this?" I found myself telling her everything, about Griffin's text message, about Jessa, about the sudden brutal end of my marriage. Sophie listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "You know," she said when I finished, "there are laws about marital property. In New York, this would likely be considered a joint asset. Your husband can't just kick you out." "I don't want to fight him for it," I said. "I just want it gone. I want everything that reminds me of this life gone." Sophie studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to tell you something. I'm not just a graduate student. I graduated last month. I'm a licensed attorney, and I specialize in divorce law and property rights." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Are you working with Griffin?" "No," she said quickly. "I've never heard of your husband until today. But I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. Once I purchase this property, it's mine legally. I can't give it back to you if you change your mind." "I won't change my mind." Sophie nodded slowly. "There's something else. My specialty isn't just divorce law, it's financial abuse and marital fraud. I've seen cases where husbands hide assets, create fake debts, transfer money to mistresses. If your husband is planning to divorce you, and he's been supporting another woman, there might be more going on than you realize." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Has he been handling all the finances? Have you noticed any changes in your joint accounts? Any new business ventures or investments?" I thought about it. Griffin had always managed our money. I had my own income from the gallery, but our major assets, our investments, the penthouse, all of that was in his name or jointly held. And recently, he had been talking about new business opportunities, partnerships I didn't fully understand. I think," I said slowly, "I need to look at our financial records." Sophie reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. "Before you sign anything with me, call this number. It's a private investigator who specializes in financial fraud. If your husband has been planning this for a while, you need to know what you're dealing with." I took the card, feeling like I was accepting a weapon I didn't know how to use. "Mrs. Henderson," Sophie said gently, "I'll hold off on purchasing the apartment for 24 hours. I think you should know exactly what you're walking away from before you walk away from it." After she left, I sat alone in the apartment that had been my home for 15 years. The silence was deafening. I pulled out my phone and stared at Griffin's contact information. We had been together since I was 26 years old. He was the only serious relationship I'd ever had. I'd built my entire adult life around him, and he'd thrown it away with a text message. I dialed the number Sophie had given me. A woman answered on the second ring. "Margaret Reeves, Private Investigation Services." "Ms. Reeves, my name is Meredith Henderson. I think my husband might be stealing from me." "Mrs. Henderson," Margaret's voice was warm but professional. "Why don't you tell me what's happened?" As I began to speak, I realized that this was just the beginning. Griffin thought he was discarding me like an old piece of furniture. He had no idea that he'd just awakened something in me I didn't even know existed. The woman who had spent 32 years being a devoted wife was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who was about to discover just how much she'd been underestimated. Margaret Reeves had the kind of voice that made you trust her immediately. Warm but sharp, like a teacher who genuinely cared about your success, but wouldn't tolerate nonsense. We arranged to meet the next morning at a small coffee shop near my gallery in Soho. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where I could see the door. My hands were shaking as I ordered a latte, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since Griffin's text message 24 hours ago. The barista, a young man with kind eyes, noticed my trembling and brought me a blueberry muffin without my asking. "On the house," he said gently. "You look like you need it." I almost cried at this small kindness from a stranger. Margaret walked in exactly on time. She was in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple black blazer and carried a worn leather portfolio that looked like it had seen 1,000 investigations. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Sophie Chen called me last night. She's worried about you." "Sophie barely knows me," I said, surprised. Sophie has good instincts about people, and she's seen this pattern before. Margaret opened her portfolio and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me about your finances." "Everything." I took a shaky breath and began. Griffin and I had joint checking and savings accounts. He managed our investment portfolio. The penthouse was in both our names, but he'd handled the purchase and all the paperwork. I had my own business account for the gallery, but Griffin had access to that as well, for tax purposes, he'd said. "How much is in your joint accounts?" Margaret asked. "I'm not sure exactly. Griffin handles all that. Maybe $200,000? 300? Margaret's pen stopped moving. "You don't know how much money you have?" Heat flushed my cheeks. Griffin is better with numbers. I trust him to handle it. "When did you last look at a bank statement?" I tried to remember. "Maybe 6 months ago?" Griffin gets them electronically and prints out summaries for me. Margaret made several notes. "What about your gallery? How much revenue does that generate?" "This past year, about $800,000. It's been my best year yet." "And Griffin has access to those accounts?" "Yes, but only for tax planning and investment advice." Margaret's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to do something right now. I want you to call your bank and get the current balances on all your accounts." My stomach nodded. "Why?" "Because in my experience, when a man suddenly moves his mistress into the family home, it's because he's already moved the family money somewhere else." With trembling fingers, I dialed the customer service number for our bank. After navigating through the automated system and providing security information, I was connected to a representative. "Could you please tell me the current balance in my joint checking account?" I asked. "Certainly, Mrs. Henderson." "Your joint checking account shows a balance of $437.18. The coffee shop seemed to spin around me. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" $437.18. "What about our joint savings?" "That account shows a balance of $52.93. I felt like I was going to vomit. "What about our investment account with Morrison Financial?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, but I don't show any accounts with Morrison Financial linked to your Social Security number." I hung up and stared at Margaret, who was watching me with sympathetic but unsurprised eyes. "How much should have been in those accounts?" she asked gently. "At least $300,000, I whispered. "Maybe more." Margaret nodded grimly. "I need to ask you something else. Has Griffin been working late more often recently? Taking business trips you don't usually hear about? Mentioning new business ventures or investment opportunities?" I thought back over the past year. "Yes, all of that. He said he was expanding his consulting practice, taking on new clients. He's been gone 2 or 3 nights a week." "And Jessa, how long have you known about her?" "I suspected something for about 6 months. but I only confirmed it 3 months ago when I saw them together at a restaurant downtown. Margaret made more notes. Mrs. Henderson, I think your husband has been planning this divorce for a long time, and I think he's been systematically moving assets to protect them from being divided in the divorce. My phone buzzed. Sophie Chen's name appeared on the screen. Go ahead and answer, Margaret said. Sophie's on our side. Mrs. Henderson, Sophie's voice was urgent. I've been doing some research on your husband's business. I need to ask you, has he mentioned any companies called Meridian Holdings or Apex Consulting Group? Meridian, yes. He said it was a new partnership he was forming. Why? Because I've found corporate filings for both companies. Guess who's listed as the sole owner? My blood went cold. Griffin? No, Jessa Morrison. Your husband has been transferring assets into companies owned by his mistress. Margaret leaned forward. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to go home right now and look for any paperwork Griffin might have. Bank statements, business documents, anything. Can you do that? I nodded, though the thought of going back to the penthouse made me feel sick. And Mrs. Henderson? Don't tell Griffin what you're doing. If he knows you're investigating, he might accelerate whatever he's planning. An hour later, I stood in the doorway of Griffin's home office, a room I rarely entered. It had always been his private domain, filled with filing cabinets and business books, and the expensive computer setup he'd bought himself for his 60th birthday. The room smelled like his cologne and leather, scents that had once been comforting, but now made my skin crawl. I felt like an intruder in my own home. I started with his desk drawers, my hands shaking as I rifled through papers. Most of it was incomprehensible business jargon, but I photographed everything with my phone. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled Personal that made my breath catch. Inside were bank statements for accounts I'd never seen before. Statements showing large transfers, 20,000 here, 15,000 there, all going to accounts I didn't recognize. There were also printouts of what looked like real estate listings for expensive apartments, all downtown, all in areas where young professionals lived. And then I found the ring box. It was small, black velvet, sitting in the back of the drawer like a hidden confession. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a diamond ring. Not just any diamond ring, a massive emerald-cut stone that had to be at least 3 carats, set in platinum. The kind of ring that costs more than most people's cars. I stared at it, feeling something break inside me that hadn't already been broken. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a middle-aged man having a crisis. Griffin had been planning a whole new life. A life that didn't include me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope you're enjoying the hotel. Don't bother coming back. Your things will be packed and stored. Jessa. She was already in my home, in my life, dismantling everything I'd built, and she was confident enough to text me about it. I photographed the ring, the bank statements, everything in the folder. Then I called Sophie. I found something, I said when she answered. What kind of something? The kind that proves you were right. Griffin's been planning this for months, maybe years. There was a pause. Mrs. Henderson, I think it's time you knew something about me. Something I didn't tell you yesterday. My stomach dropped. What? My father is David Chen. He's an artist. You've represented his work at your gallery for the past 5 years. I nearly dropped the phone. David Chen was one of my most successful artists. His paintings had launched my gallery into the higher echelons of the New York art world. But more than that, David had become a friend. We'd spent countless hours talking about art, life, the creative process. David never mentioned he had a daughter who was a lawyer, I said, because I asked him not to. I've been watching your situation for months, Mrs. Henderson. My father has been worried about you. He's noticed changes in your behavior, in your financial decisions regarding the gallery. He suspected something was wrong, but didn't know how to help. I felt like the world was tilting on its axis. You've been watching me. Not spying, caring. My father talks about you like your family. When your listing appeared yesterday, he called me immediately. He knew something was seriously wrong. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness of people who barely knew me while my husband of 32 years was systematically destroying my life. Sophie, I said, I want to sell you the apartment. But I want to do it right. I want Griffin and Jessa to walk into an apartment that belongs to someone else, with no warning, no preparation, no chance to save face. Mrs. Henderson, are you sure? This is a big decision. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. But Sophie, I need to ask you for something else. What? I need to disappear for a few days. I need Griffin to think he's won while I figure out exactly how much he's stolen from me. Sophie was quiet for a moment. I think I know just the place. As I hung up the phone and looked around Griffin's office one last time, I realized something had fundamentally changed inside me. The woman who had been devastated by her husband's betrayal was evolving into someone else entirely. Someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't getting mad. It was getting everything. Sophie's safe place turned out to be a charming brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that belonged to her father, David. As we climbed the steps to the front door, I felt like I was entering a different world, one where art covered every wall and creativity breathed through every room. Dad's in his studio, Sophie explained, leading me through a living room filled with canvases and sculptures. He doesn't know you're coming, but he'll be thrilled to see you. David emerged from the back room covered in paint, his gray hair wild and his eyes bright with the focused intensity I'd seen during our gallery meetings. When he saw me, his face broke into a concerned smile. Meredith, he said, wiping his hands on a paint-stained rag. Sophie told me what's happening. I'm so sorry. I found myself crying for the first time since Griffin's text message. David's genuine concern, after 32 years of my husband's calculated indifference, broke something loose inside me. David, I need to tell you both something, I said, accepting the cup of tea Sophie pressed into my hands. I haven't been completely honest about my situation. They exchanged glances, and I realized they were both preparing for me to reveal something worse than they'd imagined. The truth is, I continued, settling into David's worn leather chair, I've known about Griffin's affair for 8 months. Sophie nearly dropped her own cup. You knew? I hired a private investigator last summer. Not Margaret, someone else. I've been documenting everything Griffin has been doing for months. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. For 8 months, I'd been living a double life, playing the oblivious wife while secretly building a case against my own husband. Why didn't you confront him? David asked gently. Because I needed to know how deep it went. And David, it goes very deep. And I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I'd been taking for months. Bank statements Griffin thought I'd never see, credit card bills for expensive dinners, jewelry, hotel rooms, transfer records showing money moving from our joint accounts to offshore holdings. Griffin has been planning this divorce for over 2 years, I explained. He's been systematically moving assets, creating shell companies, even setting up what looks like fake debts to make our estate appear less valuable than it is. Sophie studied the photos, her lawyer's mind clearly racing. This is massive financial fraud. It gets worse, I said. 3 months ago, I discovered that Griffin has been skimming money from my gallery's accounts. He's stolen approximately $250,000 from my business over the past 18 months. David's face darkened. That son of a... But here's what Griffin doesn't know, I interrupted, allowing myself to smile for the first time in days. I've been playing chess while he's been playing checkers. I pulled a manila folder from my purse, one I'd been carrying for months, updating it regularly with new evidence. 6 months ago, I moved all of my truly valuable assets into a trust controlled by my business attorney. The gallery's real estate, my personal art collection, even my grandmother's jewelry. It's all protected. Griffin has been stealing from accounts that I've been deliberately keeping low. Sophie's eyes widened. You've been letting him steal small amounts while protecting the big assets? Exactly. And every theft has been documented by my private investigator. Griffin thinks he's been clever, but he's actually been building an ironclad legal case against himself. I opened the folder and spread out documents across David's coffee table. Bank records, emails I'd retrieved from Griffin's computer, photographs of him and Jessa together, receipts for the apartment he'd been paying for downtown. This is everything, I said. 2 years of planning, documented and verified. Griffin has committed embezzlement, marital fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. When this goes to court, he won't just lose half our assets. He'll lose everything, and he might face criminal charges. David leaned back in his chair, staring at me with new respect. Meredith, you're not the woman I thought I knew. I'm not the woman I thought I was either, I admitted. But when someone you love betrays you systematically and deliberately, you learn what you're really made of. Sophie was studying the documents with professional intensity. Mrs. Henderson, Meredith, this is brilliant. But why sell the penthouse for $100? Why not just file for divorce and take him for everything? I took a deep breath, preparing to reveal the final piece of my plan. Because Griffin's weakest point isn't his greed, it's his ego. He's spent 2 years planning what he thinks is the perfect crime. He believes he's outsmarted me completely. He's so confident in his superiority that he actually texted me to stay away from my own home. I pulled out my phone and showed them Griffin's message again. Griffin is expecting me to either crumble in defeat or fight him in a messy, expensive divorce that could take years. He's not expecting me to make him completely irrelevant. Sophie's eyes lit up with understanding. The apartment sale isn't about the money, it's about control. Exactly. When Griffin and Jessa arrive at what they think is their new love nest, they'll find a 24-year-old law student living there legally. Griffin will have no legal recourse, no way to undo it, and no explanation for how his brilliant plan went so wrong. And then? David asked. And then I'll reveal that I've known everything all along. That while he was congratulating himself on his clever deception, I was building an airtight legal case that will destroy him financially and professionally. I looked at both of them, feeling lighter than I had in months. Griffin thinks he's discarding me. What he's actually doing is freeing me from a marriage that's been dead for years, while providing me with everything I need to start over completely on my own terms. Sophie was grinning now. When do you want to complete the apartment sale? Tomorrow morning. I want the deed transferred before Griffin and Jessa arrive for their big move-in. That evening, I sat in David's garden while he cooked dinner, and Sophie reviewed legal documents. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. The constant tension of maintaining my double life was finally lifting. My phone rang. Griffin's name appeared on the screen. Hello, Griffin, I answered calmly. Meredith, I know this is hard for you, but we need to discuss practical matters. My lawyer will call you tomorrow about the divorce proceedings. Of course, I said, my voice pleasantly neutral. I'm sure we can work everything out amicably. There was a pause. Griffin had expected anger, tears, begging. My calm acceptance clearly confused him. Good, he said finally. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. It's better for everyone. You're absolutely right, I agreed. This is definitely better for everyone. After I hung up, Sophie looked at me admiringly. You're scary good at this. I had an excellent teacher, I replied. Griffin himself. He taught me that the most devastating betrayals are the ones the victim never sees coming. David emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine. Should we toast to new beginnings? Not yet, I said. Let's wait until Griffin and Jessa get their surprise tomorrow. Then we'll toast. As the three of us sat around David's table, sharing a simple dinner and talking about art and life and the future, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. The woman who had spent 32 years trying to be the perfect wife was gone. In her place was someone stronger, smarter, and completely uninterested in anyone's approval but her own. Griffin had no idea what he'd awakened when he sent that text message. Tomorrow, he was going to find out. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, my private investigator. Final report ready. Griffin's total theft from your accounts. $412,000. All documented with admissible evidence. He also signed a 2-year lease on Jess's apartment, in his own name. Hope you're ready for the fireworks. I showed the message to Sophie and David. $412,000, Sophie whispered. That's a felony, David said grimly. I smiled, feeling something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. Yes, it is. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. The apartment sale closed at 9 in the morning at the law offices of Chen, Martinez and Associates, Sophie's firm, as it turned out. She hadn't just been a graduate student pretending to be a lawyer. She was a junior partner in one of Manhattan's most respected family law practices. Your husband chose the wrong wife to underestimate, said Elena Martinez, the senior partner, as she handed me a copy of the finalized deed transfer. And he definitely picked the wrong family to mess with. I learned that David Chen wasn't just Sophie's father. He was Elena's ex-husband, and Sophie's stepmother was one of the most feared divorce attorneys in New York. When Sophie had called in reinforcements, she'd assembled a legal dream team. By 10:30 that morning, Sophie was officially the owner of my former penthouse. The deed was recorded, the locks were changed, and a moving truck was already delivering her belongings. We'd timed everything perfectly. I positioned myself in the coffee shop across the street from our building, with a clear view of the entrance. Sophie was upstairs, settling in with the calm efficiency of someone who'd planned this operation like a military strike. At exactly 11:45, Griffin's black BMW pulled up to the curb. Through the coffee shop window, I watched him step out, looking confident and relaxed. He was wearing the navy suit I'd bought him for his 60th birthday and the Rolex I'd given him for our 25th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessa emerged from the passenger side like a queen stepping onto her throne. She wore a tight white dress and carried a Louis Vuitton bag that I knew had cost at least $5,000, paid for, no doubt, with money Griffin had stolen from our accounts. Behind them, a moving truck pulled up. 2 men began unloading boxes and furniture, expensive pieces that I didn't recognize. Griffin had been busy furnishing his new life. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. They're in the lobby. Griffin's arguing with the doorman about the key not working. Should be up in 5 minutes. I ordered another coffee and settled in to watch the show. Through my phone, I could hear everything happening upstairs through Sophie's wireless earbuds. The elevator doors opened, footsteps in the hallway, Griffin's voice growing louder as he approached the apartment. The key's not working, I heard him tell Jessa. The management company must have given us the wrong one. Just call them. Jessa's voice was sharp with irritation. I want to get settled before the furniture arrives. The doorbell rang, the doorbell of my former home. Good morning, Sophie's voice came through clearly. Can I help you? Silence. Then Griffin's voice, confused and uncertain for the first time in our 32-year marriage. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. This is my apartment. I live here. I'm afraid that's not correct, Sophie replied pleasantly. I'm Sophie Chen, and this is my apartment. I have the deed right here if you'd like to see it. Your apartment? Jessa's voice was shrill. What are you talking about? Griffin, what is she talking about? I could picture Griffin's face, that particular expression he got when he encountered a problem he couldn't immediately solve or control. Young lady, Griffin's voice took on the condescending tone I'd heard him use with waiters and clerks. I think you're confused. My wife and I own this apartment. We've lived here for 15 years. Actually, Sophie said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Your wife sold this apartment to me yesterday morning for $100. The sale was legally completed this morning. Would you like to see the paperwork? The silence stretched so long I thought my earbuds had disconnected. Then Jessa exploded. What do you mean she sold it? She can't sell it. We're moving in today. Our stuff is downstairs. Ma'am, Sophie said calmly, I understand this is upsetting, but I'm the legal owner of this property now. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security. This is impossible. Griffin's voice was strained. Meredith would never. She couldn't. The apartment was in both our names. She can't sell it without my signature. Actually, Sophie said, according to the property records, the apartment was placed in your wife's sole name 3 years ago. Something about tax advantages, according to the documentation. Your wife had every legal right to sell. I remembered that transaction. Griffin had insisted on putting the apartment solely in my name for estate planning purposes. He'd assured me it was just a technicality that would save us money on taxes. Now I understood. He'd been protecting the apartment from his own debts and business dealings, never imagining I might use that protection against him. Call Meredith, Jessa demanded. Call her right now and tell her to fix this. Griffin's voice was getting higher, more desperate. Meredith, where are you? Answer your phone! My phone was indeed ringing. I smiled and declined the call. She's not answering, Griffin said. Well, call the police, Jessa shrieked. This has to be illegal. You can't just steal someone's apartment. I didn't steal anything, Sophie replied. I purchased this property legally from the rightful owner. If you have an issue with that, you'll need to take it up with her. I could hear Jessa's heels clicking frantically across my former marble floors. This is our bedroom. Our bed was supposed to go right here. Griffin, do something. Ma'am, Sophie said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. You need to leave now. You're trespassing on private property. My phone rang again. This time it was a video call. I answered, and Griffin's panicked face appeared on the screen. Meredith, what the hell is going on? There's some girl in our apartment claiming you sold it to her. Hello, Griffin, I said calmly. How's your morning going? Behind him, I could see Jessa pacing frantically, her perfectly styled hair starting to come undone. Don't play games with me, Griffin snapped. Fix this right now. Fix what? I sold the apartment. It's not ours anymore. Griffin's face went through several color changes. You sold our apartment? Our $5 million apartment? I sold my apartment, I corrected. It's been in my name for 3 years, remember? Your idea. For how much? His voice was barely a whisper. $100. The phone went silent except for Jessa's increasingly hysterical voice in the background. Meredith, Griffin said finally, his voice strangely calm. You've had some kind of breakdown. This isn't rational behavior. We can fix this. We can get the sale reversed. Actually, we can't, I said. The sale is final and legal, but Griffin, there's something else we need to discuss. What? I know about Meridian Holdings. I know about Apex Consulting Group. I know about the $412,000 you've stolen from our accounts over the past 2 years. The color drained from Griffin's face completely. I know about the apartment you've been paying for downtown. I know about the jewelry you bought Jessa with my gallery's money. I know about all of it, Griffin. I've known for 8 months. Jessa had stopped pacing. Even through the phone, I could see her staring at Griffin with dawning horror. $400,000? She said slowly. Griffin, what is she talking about? Jessa, I said pleasantly, addressing her directly. Did Griffin tell you he was independently wealthy? Because he's not. Every penny he spent on you was stolen from me. That's not true, Griffin stammered. Meredith, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 32 years, I interrupted. And I have documentation for everything, Griffin. Bank records, transfer statements, emails, photos, everything. Jessa was backing away from Griffin now, her face twisted with disgust and panic. You told me you were rich, she screamed at him. You told me you had money. I quit my job. I gave up my apartment. The apartment he's been paying for? I asked helpfully. The lease he signed in his own name? That apartment? Sophie's voice came through the phone clearly. Mr. Henderson, I really do need you to leave now. The moving truck is blocking the building entrance. This isn't over, Griffin said, but his voice had lost all its authority. Oh, it's completely over, I replied. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. And Griffin? You might want to call a criminal defense attorney. Embezzling $400,000 is a felony. I hung up and watched through the coffee shop window as Griffin, Jessa, and their moving truck retreated in complete disarray. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Coast is clear. That was even better than we planned. As I walked back toward the building that had been my home for 15 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete and total freedom. Griffin had spent 2 years planning my destruction. Instead, he'd engineered his own. The call came 3 days after the apartment confrontation. I was in my gallery cataloging new pieces for an upcoming exhibition when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Meredith? The voice was barely recognizable as Jessa's. Gone was the confident, entitled tone I'd heard through Sophie's earbuds. This was the voice of someone whose world had just collapsed. Hello, Jessa, I said calmly, setting down my pen. I need to talk to you. About Griffin. About everything. I almost laughed. I can't imagine what we'd have to discuss. Please, she said, and I heard something that sounded like tears. I know you have no reason to help me, but I'm in serious trouble, and it's all because of him. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to meet her at a small cafe in Midtown. As I hung up, I wondered what new drama Griffin had created. Jessa looked nothing like the polished woman who had stepped out of Griffin's BMW just days earlier. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a wrinkled sweater, and her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. What do you want, Jessa? She took a shaky breath. I want to tell you everything Griffin did, and I want to help you destroy him. I raised an eyebrow. That's quite a change of heart. You don't understand, she said, leaning forward desperately. I thought Griffin was rich. I thought he owned companies, had investments, had money. He showed me bank statements, property records, business documents. It all looked real. Some of it was real, I said. The money he stole from me. But that's just it. I didn't know it was stolen. He told me he was separated from you, that the divorce was almost final, that you'd already agreed to split everything. He said you were getting the gallery and he was getting the apartment and the cash. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. What I saw was genuine panic and desperation. How much did he spend on you? I asked. I don't know exactly. Maybe $150,000? The apartment lease, furniture, clothes, jewelry, trips. She trailed off, seeming to realize how it sounded. And now? Now I'm homeless. The apartment was in his name, but he can't pay the rent because his accounts are frozen. The furniture was repossessed yesterday because he bought it all on credit he can't cover. And the worst part? She paused, her voice breaking. What? The worst part is that I loved him. I actually loved him. I thought we were going to get married, have a life together. But everything was a lie. I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Griffin was a master manipulator. If he could fool me for 32 years, fooling a 28-year-old for 2 years would have been child's play. Jessa, I said carefully, what exactly do you know about Griffin's business dealings? More than I thought, she said, reaching into her purse. When everything fell apart, I started going through his papers. Look at this. She spread several documents across the table. Corporate filings, bank records, loan applications, all bearing Griffin's signature, all showing financial obligations I'd never heard of. Griffin borrowed against your gallery, she said, pointing to one document. He took out a second mortgage on the apartment without telling you. And look at this. He's been running 3 different investment scams, promising returns he could never deliver. My blood went cold as I read through the papers. Griffin hadn't just stolen from me. He'd been operating like a one-man financial crime syndicate. How many people has he defrauded? I asked. At least a dozen that I know of, maybe more. He convinced investors to put money into his fake companies, then used their investments to fund our lifestyle. When they asked for returns, he'd find new investors to pay them off. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, and it was all about to come crashing down. Jessa, why are you showing me this? Because I found something else, she said, pulling out a thick manila folder. Griffin has been planning to disappear. Inside the folder were copies of passport applications, bank account information for accounts in the Cayman Islands, and what looked like real estate listings in Costa Rica. He was going to take whatever money he could salvage and run, she continued. He told me we were moving to Costa Rica to start fresh, but I found out he'd only bought one plane ticket. I stared at the documents, feeling a cold fury building in my chest. Griffin hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He'd been planning to abandon both of us and flee the country with whatever money he could steal. Where is he now? I asked. I don't know. He disappeared 2 days ago when the bank froze his accounts. But Meredith, there's something else, something that might help you. She pulled out a small recording device. Griffin doesn't know I have this, but I recorded some of our conversations about his business dealings, including the ones where he talked about stealing money from your gallery and forging your signature on loan documents. I took the device with trembling hands. He forged my signature? Multiple times, on loans, contracts, even on some of the corporate paperwork for his fake companies. He said you never paid attention to business documents anyway, so you'd never notice. That was it, the final straw. Griffin hadn't just betrayed me emotionally and financially. He'd committed identity theft and fraud using my name. I called Margaret immediately. Margaret, I need you to contact the FBI Financial Crimes Division and call Elena Martinez. We're not just filing for divorce anymore. We're pressing criminal charges. 2 hours later, I sat in Elena Martinez's office with Jessa, Margaret, Sophie, and a federal agent named Detective Sarah Chen, Sophie's cousin as it turned out. The Chen family was apparently full of overachievers. Mrs. Henderson, Detective Chen said, based on what we're seeing here, your husband has committed multiple federal crimes. Wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, operating an unlicensed investment scheme. We're looking at potential sentences of 15 to 20 years. But I need you to understand, she continued, prosecuting this case will require your full cooperation. There will be depositions, court appearances, media attention. Your private life will become very public. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I want to prosecute to the full extent of the law, I said. That evening, I sat in David's garden again, this time with a glass of wine and a sense of completion I hadn't expected. Sophie sat beside me, reviewing legal documents, while David worked on a painting that somehow captured the chaos and resolution of the past week. The FBI raided Griffin's office this morning, Sophie said, looking up from her papers. They found evidence of at least 15 victims of his investment fraud. The total amount stolen is over $2 million. And Jessa? She's cooperating fully with the investigation. Her testimony, combined with her recordings, will probably put Griffin away for a very long time. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but somehow I knew. Meredith. Griffin's voice was desperate, broken. Please, you have to call off the FBI. I can explain everything. Where are you, Griffin? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're destroying our family over a misunderstanding. I laughed, actually laughed, at his audacity. Our family? Griffin, you destroyed our family when you decided to steal from me to fund your affair. You destroyed it when you forged my signature on loan documents. You destroyed it when you planned to flee the country and leave both me and your girlfriend behind. You don't understand the pressure I was under. No, Griffin, you don't understand. I know about Costa Rica. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about all of it. Silence. The FBI will find you, I continued. Probably within the next 48 hours. You can run, but every credit card transaction, every phone call, every hotel stay is being tracked. You're not nearly as smart as you think you are. Meredith, please. Goodbye, Griffin. I hung up and blocked his number. 2 days later, Griffin was arrested at Miami International Airport, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The news made the local papers. Manhattan investment advisor arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. For the first time in 32 years, I didn't have to worry about Griffin's moods, his demands, his subtle criticisms and manipulations. I didn't have to pretend our marriage was happy or our life was perfect. I was 58 years old, and I was finally free to discover who I really was. 6 months later, I stood in the main gallery of my new space in Chelsea, watching as visitors moved through the exhibition I'd curated called Resilience, Art from Ashes. The opening night crowd was smaller than my usual events, but the energy was different, more intimate, more genuine. David's latest series dominated the main wall, paintings that somehow captured the process of transformation, of breaking apart and rebuilding stronger. Sophie stood beside one of them, explaining to a collector how her father had painted it during the weeks when I'd stayed in their brownstone. It's about finding strength in destruction, she was saying, about how sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most painful experiences. I smiled, remembering how lost I'd felt just 6 months ago. Now, looking around at my new gallery, my new life, I could barely recognize that devastated woman who'd received Griffin's text message. The criminal trial had ended 3 weeks ago. Griffin was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. The judge had been particularly harsh about the identity theft charges, noting that stealing from one's spouse represented a special level of betrayal. Mr. Henderson, the judge had said during sentencing, you didn't just commit financial crimes. You systematically destroyed a 32-year marriage through deception and theft. You forged your wife's signature, stole her money, and planned to abandon her with nothing while you fled the country. This court finds your actions particularly reprehensible. I'd sat in the courtroom during his sentencing, feeling nothing but a profound sense of closure. Griffin had looked older, grayer, diminished in his orange jumpsuit. When his eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before in 32 years of marriage. Genuine remorse. Too little. Too late. The restitution process had been complicated, but ultimately satisfying. Griffin's Ponzi scheme had collapsed completely, but the FBI had recovered most of the stolen assets. I got back every penny he'd taken from my gallery, plus additional damages. The other victims of his investment fraud received partial restitution from the sale of Griffin's remaining assets. Jessa had disappeared after the trial ended. She'd testified against Griffin, providing crucial evidence that helped secure his conviction. The last I heard, she'd moved back to her hometown in Ohio and was working at her family's hardware store. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience. Meredith? A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Elena Martinez approaching with a champagne glass and a warm smile. Elena, I'm so glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it, she said, gesturing around the gallery. This is incredible. You've built something beautiful here. The new gallery was smaller than my old space, but it was entirely mine. No joint accounts, no shared ownership, no husband with access to my business records. I'd used part of the restitution money to purchase the space outright, ensuring that no one could ever take it from me again. How does it feel? Elena asked. Different, I said honestly. Scary sometimes, but good scary. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you can fly. Sophie joined us, looking elegant in a navy dress that made her look older than her 24 years. The Times critic just left, she reported. I think he was impressed. He spent almost 20 minutes looking at the David Chen pieces. "And how are you settling into your new place?" I asked Sophie. She grinned. "The penthouse is perfect. I've turned Griffin's old office into my law library. There's something poetic about using his former space to help other women escape financial abuse." Sophie had kept the penthouse as planned, but she'd put it to better use than Griffin ever had. She'd started a pro bono practice specializing in helping women who'd been financially abused by their partners. Her first client was one of Griffin's Ponzi scheme victims, a widow who'd invested her late husband's insurance money and lost everything. "Speaking of which," Sophie continued, lowering her voice, "I got a call today from a woman whose husband has been hiding assets offshore." Sound familiar? I laughed. The Griffin Henderson playbook seems to be more common than we thought. Unfortunately, yes. But the good news is, we're getting very good at recognizing the patterns and building cases against these men. As the evening wound down and the last visitors left, I found myself alone in the gallery with David. He was standing in front of his own work, studying it with the critical eye of an artist who never stopped learning. "Do you miss it?" he asked without turning around. "Miss what?" "The old life, the security of being married, the big apartment, the social status." I considered his question seriously. Did I miss anything about my life with Griffin? "I miss feeling safe," I said finally. "I miss believing that someone loved me unconditionally. But I've realized that safety built on lies isn't really safety at all. And Griffin never loved me unconditionally. He loved me as long as I was useful to him." David nodded, still studying his painting. "What do you think comes next?" "I don't know," I said, and realized that for the first time in my adult life, not knowing felt liberating rather than terrifying. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll expand the gallery. Maybe I'll learn to paint. All of the above? Maybe. As I walked home to my small apartment in the village, the first place I'd ever lived completely alone, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. She'd been so afraid of being alone that she'd tolerated 32 years of subtle emotional abuse and financial control. She'd believed that any marriage was better than no marriage, that any love was better than no love. She'd been wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Miami. Federal prison. I almost deleted it without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Meredith, I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry. I never meant for things to go so far. I hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I am happy. Probably for the first time in 32 years. Thank you for setting me free." I hit send, then blocked the number. Griffin belonged to my past now, and my past was a place I had no intention of revisiting. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I passed Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, who was checking her mailbox. "How was your art opening, dear?" she asked with genuine interest. "Wonderful," I said. "You should come to the next one." "I'd love that. You know, I've been watching you these past few months, and you seem like a completely different person than when you first moved in." "How so?" She smiled. "You smile now. Really smile. When you first moved in, you looked like someone who was afraid the world might collapse at any moment. Now you look like someone who knows she can handle whatever comes next." In my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window overlooking the street below. The space was small, but entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every book, every photograph reflected my choices, my taste, my life. On my coffee table sat a letter I'd received earlier in the week. It was from a woman named Patricia, whose husband had embezzled money from her business to fund his gambling addiction. She'd read about my case in the newspaper and wanted to know if I could recommend a lawyer. I'd connected her with Sophie, of course. But her letter had made me realize something. My story wasn't unique. There were women everywhere who were being systematically betrayed and financially abused by the men they'd trusted most. Maybe there was something I could do about that. Maybe my experience with Griffin could serve a larger purpose. I opened my laptop and began to type. Dear Patricia, I'm glad you reached out. You're not alone, and you're not powerless. Here's what I learned about fighting back. As I wrote, sharing everything I'd learned about protecting assets, documenting abuse, and building a case for prosecution, I realized I'd found my next purpose. The gallery would always be my first love, but maybe I could use my experience to help other women escape the kind of financial prison Griffin had built around me. The woman who had been afraid to check her own bank balance was gone. In her place was someone who understood that the most dangerous person in your life could be the one sleeping beside you, and that the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to be a victim. Griffin had spent 2 years planning what he thought would be my destruction. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift possible, the knowledge of my own strength. I was 58 years old, divorced, and completely on my own for the first time in my life. I had never been happier. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.